the 40th session of this series. My name is Rocky Guzman. I'm the International Governance and Legal Specialist Consultant from the ADB's Climate Change and Sustainable Development Department. And again, I'm honored to be the moderator for today's webinar entitled Digitizing Waste with Women at the Center, Insights from Southeast Asia. This topic is very timely as today is World Environment Day with the theme Putting an End to Plastic Pollution. This occasion also seeks to bring insights after ADB's nearly 3 years of promoting circular economy solutions and innovations through the technical assistance on promoting action on plastic pollution. Now, for this session, we'll explore how digital solutions can strengthen plastic waste management by engaging women as key users. Today, we focus on the findings and highlights of a recently published policy brief which focuses on how digital technology can strengthen inclusivity in plastic waste management, with evidence from Indonesia and Vietnam. Now, for this webinar, we have an esteemed panelist with us who will share her insights and expertise. And after the presentation, we will then proceed to the Q&A segment. But please feel free to put your questions anytime on the question box below in your screens. So without further ado, let's start with the panel. I'm honored to introduce our panelist, Caterina Meloni. Katerina is the founder and gender finance advisor of Connecting Founders. She is a gender finance specialist with over 25 years of experience working at the crossroads of finance. She supports international finance institutions, development partners, and government bodies in integrating a gender and climate lens across finance and infrastructure programs. Now, prior to founding Connecting Founders, Katerina also worked with development institutions such as the World Bank and IFC. And Katerina also is an angel investor at Epic Angels, which is passionate about supporting female founders in Asia and the Pacific. Katerina, we're very pleased to have you today and also very, very keen to hear your insights as the co-author of the policy brief. Thank you so much. And you have the floor, please, Katerina.
Thank you, Rocky, for the introduction, and thank you, ADB, for having me and inviting me to this important webinar. I'm looking forward to sharing the insights of this work. So let me prepare a few slides. Let me know if you can't see them. Otherwise, I'm assuming that everything is good. Thank you for that. So today, as Rocky introduced, we'll be focusing on how digital solutions can enhance plastic value chain management systems by engaging women as key users and stakeholders. And the insights that I will be sharing today come from work that was under an ADB-funded regional technical assistance project covering 4 countries: Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. And that fundamentally aimed at finding practical solutions to reducing the amount of plastic pollution that ends up in waterways. The work on digital solutions were particularly focused on 2 countries. One is Indonesia and the other one is Vietnam. Here we applied a very strong gender lens, and we really look at the role of women across the different nodes of the plastic value chain, plastic waste value chain. And I will do my best now in the next 20 minutes to take you through the key findings. But as was mentioned, this is also was captured in a brief that was recently published. So for any additional information, please also refer to that one. Now, this work is based on primary research that was conducted in 2 cities. One is Cirebon, which is a mid-sized city of about 340,000 people on the island of Java. It's situated quite low at the coastal area and is in between and is surrounded by a dense network of rivers and waterways, which makes it particularly vulnerable to plastic leakage into waters. And then there is Tan An in Vietnam, which is about 100 kilometers south east of Ho Chi Minh, and it's also particularly relevant because it's at the edge of the Mekong Delta. It's part of the Mekong Basin, which is one of the most densely populated and ecologically sensitive regions in Southeast Asia. And so the two cities were also chosen for this particular vulnerability to plastic leakages into waterways. Now, if you look at the visuals, you see that there are some similarities between the two cities in terms of one is the amount of waste that is produced or disposed of on an average basis, on a daily basis. This is 2 kilos both for Cirebon and Tan An. And then you see that in both cities, you have a very strong access to waste collection services. It's almost universal in Tan An, 99%. And it's also in Tan An, you have almost all of households that are paying for waste collection services. In Indonesia, you find that only, oh, sorry, I should say in Cirebon, you find that only about 61% of households have access to door-to-door collection services, which means that they actually rely more often to informal collectors, not only for recyclables, but also overall for their entire waste. Now, what we really looked at the role of women, as I said, within the plastic value chain, and we found that women play a key role in managing household waste in both cities and actually in both countries. First of all, women make the majority of purchasing decisions within the household, which means that they're also the ones that are responsible for the majority of plastic items that come into the household. The reason why plastic is preferred is because of its convenience, it's considered to be hygienic. Some of it is reused, but that is mostly limited to bags and refillable bottles. Now, there are different reasons for segregating waste. The two common ones are driven by economics and regulations. Economics simply means that households are selling recyclables as a way to increase their income. And this is particularly the case we found among low-income households in Cirebon, while the more affluent households actually were less inclined to segregate waste. And when it comes to regulations, this is particularly referring to Tan An, where the municipality had introduced pilot to segregate waste in certain districts, and starting in 2025 is supposed to be extended to the entire municipality. The share of waste generators of households that would actually segregate waste is simply because it's good for the environment. It was actually quite limited within the overall samples that we interviewed. Although, interestingly enough, those are much more common to be users of app users, as we're going to see in shortly. So in terms of some stats, when it comes to segregating waste, we find that 35% of households in Cirebon segregate waste versus 63% in Tan An, which is a much higher share. And then again, it's also related to this fact of introducing a regulation specifically for it. Now, regardless of why households decide to segregate waste, one of the things that has to note is that there are considerable challenges that they face. And some of the key challenges are the fact that there is inadequate infrastructure. The inadequate infrastructure means that they are typically not provided with separate bins or separate bags, bags of different colors that they can easily use to guide the segregation of waste at home. And also, it's in the majority of cases, there are no segregated trash cans in the vicinity, in the neighborhood, where people can easily dispose their waste. So one of the complaints that we often heard is that they don't have the space within their premises, within their house, and particularly when it comes to low-income households, to have all of these different bags with different waste. And so if they are not, if they don't have the ability to dispose it easily and conveniently close by in segregated trash cans, then oftentimes what happens is like they just end up putting everything together. And one of the things that we also heard quite often is that they, even though many of them are aware of the fact that recycling and segregating waste is important for the environment, most of them actually don't have practical knowledge and guidance on how to actually segregate waste properly. For example, what to mix, what not to mix, what to clean, what not to clean. And so in absence on that, they oftentimes end mixing everything together. And that's where the role of informal waste collectors come into play. Now, across the two countries, Indonesia and Vietnam, informal waste collectors collect virtually all recyclables. Because of the nature of the sector, the fact that they're informal, finding reliable data is quite tricky. It's quite difficult. There are some estimates, which is the one that you see here on the slides. In the case of Indonesia, it is estimated that there are about 4.2 million informal waste workers, with a considerable percentage of women. For example, in the Bantar Gebang landfill, which is the largest one in Indonesia and one of the largest ones in Southeast Asia, outside Jakarta, it is estimated that about 40% of the 3,000 waste pickers are women. In the case of Vietnam, it is estimated that there are about 3 million informal waste workers. And in the case of Vietnam, actually, the share of female collectors is much higher. In cities like Ho Chi Minh, it is estimated that actually even 80 to 90% of informal waste pickers are women. Now, in both countries, we found from the interviews that the majority of informal female collectors are internal migrants. So they come from different parts of the country. In the case of Indonesia, they are often ethnic minority. They belong to ethnic minorities. They have very low levels of education. Half of them actually had no formal education. In the case of Vietnam, we found that, interestingly, many of them were over 60. So they basically moved into waste collection after retiring or leaving their previous jobs to supplement their family incomes. Now, in both countries, what we found is that waste collection for women is a primary, pretty much full-time occupation that they choose to support their families. And one of the things that is really very important, and was mentioned again and again during the interviews, is that the flexibility is important. They are free to work at their own pace, which means that the flexible schedule allows them to combine both work responsibility with family responsibility. Now, one of the things that came out very clearly is that this informal nature of the work leaves them very vulnerable to exploitation and safe practices. There is not only the social stigma attached to this particular profession, but it's also the fact that the work is carried out with minimal protective gear. The most that we heard collectors use is gloves, masks, and sometimes very, very basic hooks, to collect the waste. Oftentimes, not even that. So they're very often exposed to injuries, diseases, particularly respiratory infections. And this is particularly concerning because many of them, particularly in Cirebon in Indonesia, they don't have access to government health insurances for different reasons. Oftentimes because, again, they come from different parts of the country. They don't have the proper IDs. They don't have formal addresses. resources. It's very difficult for them to access that. Sometimes they don't know how to go about it. Bahasa might not be their first language, for example. Now, in Vietnam, particularly when interviewing female pickers in Ho Chi Minh, we found that actually many of them decided to purchase health insurance independently at the cost of between $45 to $65 US dollars annually, depending on whether it was an individual policy or also covering key family members. And even though this is certainly a considerable sum for them, they decided that it was such a necessity that they decided to cover that expense. Now, in terms of the work really that they carry, what we found is that there is actually quite a strong division of labor along gender lines. So female collectors, and this is particularly the case in Vietnam, because in Indonesia, in Cirebon, what we found is that women either collect on foot or the collection with vehicles is left to mostly men. But so when it comes to overall collections, we found that women tend to focus on smaller items, the ones that they can easily carry. And also, again, because they typically use small, non-motorized vehicles like bicycles and push cart. On the other hand, men typically are the ones that carry heavier, bulkier items, furniture, for example, because they tend to use larger vehicles so they can transport those items more easily. Now, the reason for this choice of vehicles is not only the concerns about the cost. So we've heard a lot of female speakers that were concerned. They said that they couldn't afford the cost of buying a motorized vehicle, but also they were concerned about the recurring costs, so paying for the fuel. And on top of that, they have considerable concerns when it comes to where to keep the vehicle, where to store it at night. They didn't feel that they could safely leave it outside. And because most of them, they live in very small spaces, they decided to go for much smaller vehicles, such as a bicycle that, for example, they can easily take inside their rooms. Now, one of the things that was often mentioned is trust, particularly in Tanan. Excuse me. So trust is really the cornerstone of the female pickers' relationship with customers. They all stress the fact that it's really important to build a reputation for honesty and reliability so that they will get repeat customers, and those customers might actually also open pathways, avenues for additional sources of incomes. For example, we've heard of instances in Tanan where female pickers would also be hired to provide other services such as cleaning services that gives them additional income opportunities. So overall, I would say that what we found is that women tend to collect waste directly from households or streets, around, disposal collection points. And all collectors, they tend to sell primarily to junk shops or waste collection centers. Whatever is not sold to intermediaries is either burned, sent to the landfill, or discarded in waterways, unfortunately. So the visuals that you have here at the bottom tries to provide some insights on the average earnings for collectors both in Cirebon and in Tanan. Now, in Cirebon, we found that there was a very large difference between the average earnings for men and women. On a weekly basis, women pickers, they earn an average of the equivalent of $12 US, while men earn an average of $34. And so when we try to understand what was the reason for that? One, partly, yes, it is explained with the fact that women tend to work lower amount of hours. They are more limited in terms of where they can go to collect and what time of the day they can go to collect. Safety issues are a concern. So they, for example, they wouldn't go and work at night. So they wouldn't go in isolated places unless they are in large groups with male family members. And that's not, so men don't have the same safety concerns. But also what we found is that beyond that, there was really a much more limited negotiating power that female pickers had. Again, because of the fact that many of them are in such vulnerable positions, they are ethnic minorities, they have very limited access to information. So their ability to negotiate with intermediaries is much lower. In the case of Tanan, the biggest difference is related to the vehicle that they use. Again, the difference between an average of the equivalent of $5 a day for those that use a bicycle versus $15 a day for those that use a motorized vehicle. And again, this has gender implications because, as we said, the majority of women tend to use bicycles or push carts, so non-motorized vehicles. Now, this is an example that I wanted to show. This is a very promising example that comes from Indonesia. This is Riza Bunard, who's a social entrepreneur and the founder of the Indonesia Women Waste Collectors Association. This is the first association that is specifically dedicated to empowering women in the waste management sector in Indonesia, and is particularly focusing on this landfill that I mentioned earlier, the Bantar Gebang, which is one of the largest in Southeast Asia. Now, from her research, Riza found that about 40% of the women that work at the landfill are women, and they tend to be trapped in a cycle of poverty. Many of them marry very young, around often 14 to 15. They have very limited educational and employment opportunities, and they're often at the mercy of exploitative brokers. And so they get very limited income for what they collect. And so with the support of Ecologist, which is one of the digital service providers that we interviewed, and we're going to cover a little in some of the following slides. Now, this association is really trying to flip the scripts and trying to empower female pickers in trying to improve their working conditions and trying to sell directly to buyers, so bypassing exploitative brokers, but also improving access to resources. And some of those resources are access to information, so get better information about the prices of the different items, getting better access to financial educations, potentially also microloans, so that they can be set up with basic equipment, and fundamentally empowering them to make informed economic choices. Now, in both countries, what we found is that digital solutions have emerged as powerful tools to strengthen the plastic waste management in Indonesia and Vietnam. And what we found several examples, particularly in Indonesia but also in Vietnam, of digital platforms that are fundamentally trying to improve efficiency within the plastic value chain by connecting the different user groups. So connecting the waste generators, be it households, stores, businesses, schools, etc., with collectors and then intermediaries and then recyclers and buyers. So fundamentally trying to improve the efficiency within the value chain, and also strengthening the well-being of the informal sector as they do so. Here on the right, we have the examples of one of the digital service provider that we interviewed in Ho Chi Minh. This is VECA, and you can see in the visual an example of their business model. And now, even though now VECA has actually moved away from collecting directly from households because it wasn't really sufficiently commercially viable, and so they tend to focus on larger waste generators such as schools and larger businesses. This gives you an idea of what these businesses are trying to do. And the interesting bit that we found is that because of this key role in managing waste at the household level that we discussed earlier, now the primary users for these apps end up being women, and particularly women in a certain age group, usually below 50, oftentimes well-educated, middle to upper middle income, that also have a certain level of awareness when it comes to recycling and the environmental impact of plastic, and so they are more willing, to contribute, and trying to address the issue. And also certainly the case of the young generations, students in both countries actually, which are some of the heaviest users of these apps, or oftentimes, introducing the apps, into to the other family members. While when it comes to older generations, particularly older women, age 50 plus, we found that they actually tend to prefer just engaging the traditional way with local trustee collectors offline and using waste banks for recyclables in the case of Cirebon in Indonesia. So what we did was to look specifically at what women are looking for when it comes to these apps, what makes a difference for them in terms of engagement. And what we found when it comes to women at the household level, so the ones that generate and sell waste, is that they're looking for ease and convenience. These are top priorities. So they're looking at the ability to schedule pickups and have prompt and efficient collections, fundamentally the idea of an Uber for waste, if you will. And also they appreciate having simple and practical guidance, again, on how to segregate waste properly, and how to dispose it properly. Again, what to mix, what not to mix, etc. So when it comes to the specific features in these apps, what they appreciate is one is the platform that display transparent pricing. So they know exactly how much money the collectors is supposed to pay for, let's say, I don't know, 2 kilos of plastic bottles, for example, without the need of negotiating, which is often quite tiring and time consuming. They appreciate the ability to message, to have simply messaging the collectors, for example, if they need to reschedule the pickup or if they need to send specific instructions. So they appreciate that they can do that very easily. They appreciate the multiple payment options, and not surprisingly, different age groups have different preferences. So the younger generations prefer non-cash options, while older generations, prefer cash. And also they certainly appreciate incentives and rewards, and particularly in the case of Tanan, it was mentioned multiple times that they appreciate the ability to choose from multiple rewards that are not always the same. So there is a variety. So for example, in the case of Tanan, we often heard about gifts and plants and candles and things that tend to appeal to a female clientele that are often given as incentives. In the case of Indonesia, we heard about sometimes grocery vouchers, and in some isolated cases, we also heard about more sophisticated rewards such as spiritual trips for families or for waste bank coordinators. When it comes to the payment, there are in Vietnam, I would say actually most transactions happen in cash, pretty much. But when it comes to Indonesia and Cirebon, there are more options. You have cash, you have e-money, you have e-vouchers, and waste collectors tend to have they have access to e-money, pretty much all of them, digital wallets. Now, the same thing we did when it comes to women collectors. So again, we looked at what were their priorities in terms of engaging, using apps, using digital solutions, and what they like to see more of. Now, the very top priority, not surprisingly, is increasing and stabilizing their income. And just as the case of women as generators, they are looking for something that is easy and convenient. And the third that is also very important for female waste pickers is access to social benefits, particularly health insurance. This is really a game changer when it comes to engaging women. But unfortunately, out of all the digital service providers that we interviewed, there were only a very small number that are actually offering health insurance rewards for what they call the most loyal waste collectors, the ones that are reaching a certain volume of waste collected. Is certainly not something that is offering to all as a standard measures because of the costs involved. So when it comes to features, what collectors really appreciate is the ability to easily see where recyclables need to be picked up and the ability to schedule a collection. And most often than not, they like to do that using a regular call, so not utilizing internet. And the conversations with pickers in Tainan reveal that there are multiple reasons for that. One is the fact that even when women do actually have a smartphone, they typically don't bring it when they're collecting waste because they're afraid to lose it. Two, they don't want to burn their internet data. Three, because many of them, as I mentioned earlier, are over 60. They're older than, for example, the average in Indonesia. They are less digitally savvy, so they're afraid of making mistakes. And some of them actually reported having poor eyesight, so they really have difficulties seeing the numbers, for example, the price that they're supposed to pay for certain items. So they prefer to stay clear of digital transactions and just simply make a phone calls. But they appreciate really the ability to be able to see clearly on the map where items need to be collected. For some that are, I would say, a little bit more sophisticated in terms of, dealing with larger volumes and particularly intermediary, there is one of the features that is appreciated is certainly also the ability to record transactions. So they know exactly how much they've collected from whom and how much they've sold. In terms of payment, again, mirroring what I just said before, in Vietnam is pretty much always cash, while there are multiple options in Indonesia, in Cirebon. Now, here, what I would like to mention is that digital solutions are definitely extremely promising in terms of strengthening efficiency within the plastic value chain. They're very promising also in terms of what they can bring to informal collectors. But I think we need to be aware of the fact that to be able to leverage these digital solutions, there are certain things that are required. There are some prerequisites. So informal collectors, and particularly women that tend to be on the more vulnerable side, they're facing with several challenges. And I try to group them here in some easy buckets, so to say. One is definitely the infrastructure, the equipment. As I mentioned, not everyone has a smartphone. And oftentimes, even if they have it, they leave it at home and they just rely on fundamentally no internet working environment. Digital skills are an issue. So we've heard again and again that many older collectors in Vietnam are just not comfortable with these digital apps. The infrastructure in terms of the vehicles to collect waste is one thing, and also infrastructure in terms of where to keep the waste is has a very large impact on the earning potential for collectors. If they don't have a safe space where to store recyclables, clearly they are forced to sell everything the same day that they collect it, regardless of the price that they might fetch for those recyclables. One is the training. Now, all of the digital service providers, all of these waste organizations that we talk to, they all offer onboarding training for the collectors that they work with. But what came out very clearly again and again is that this sporadic, initial, and maybe ad hoc type of training once in a while is not sufficient, particularly for the older collectors that actually would require a much more engaged and much more consistent type of training. This is related to several things. So one is how to navigate the apps, how to handle materials safely, but also how to clean and sort recyclables so that they can fetch a higher price. And then also in terms of financing. Now, the financing is really the ability to have something that can get collectors to purchase for themselves, some minimum equipment to set up their operations. So on that, based on this research, we've set forward, a number of recommendations, and I think the gist and the message is fundamentally that digital tools can certainly make plastic waste management more inclusive and more effective. But I think there has to be an intentional effort to address the specific challenges that are faced by women, as within the households and within the informal economy, because of the key roles that they play. So if we look at these recommendations, some of them, like the first two, are related to really increasing knowledge about the contributions of women and informal waste workers in these plastic waste value chain, so that we have a better understanding of what they need, and also engaging them more intentionally, really, in anything that is related to making strategic decisions on plastic waste management. Then we have recommendations related to infrastructure, particularly when it comes to making waste segregation easier for households, so that they do it on a more regular basis, because that's a basic step and a fundamental step when it comes to increasing recycling. And that also includes strengthening awareness of how to go about it, really the providing practical guidance about what to do and what not to do, keeping in mind that and again, I always emphasize the practicality of it, keeping in mind that people are very busy. And so you just need to be very pragmatic in these do's and don'ts. And then we have some recommendations that are really specific about supporting informal collectors. One is these promising examples of cooperatives that bring different collectors together, and particularly, as I mentioned, the examples of the cooperative or the association, I should say, in outside Jakarta, that has proven to be very very positive in terms of strengthening female collectors' access to key resources, to provide access to social benefits and equipment. Again, because of the nature of their work, the health risks are extreme and considerable, and so it's having access to health insurance really is a necessity. And that also includes providing access to microfinance loans if needed and if requested, to be able to set up, some micro waste collection enterprises. And then the number 7, the final recommendation, is really, again, aim at providing ongoing support to female collectors on the different items or different topics, I should say, that they need in terms of improving their role, strengthening their role and the power dynamics, shift the power dynamics more in their favor when it comes to the plastic value chain. So on that note, I am going to stop here, and I'm going to open the floor to questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Katerina, for that insightful and very comprehensive overview of a very important and timely topic. Again, we don't have time to delve on too many details, but thank you for that very comprehensive overview. But please feel free to read the policy brief. We put the link on the comments box below. But just before we go to the floor and get some questions, I really like what you said. The recognizing that women face challenges, right? Both structurally, including inadequate infrastructure, and also at the household level. Sometimes there are no provisions for sorting and limited space for vehicles. These are very practical considerations that we have to consider, right? But I also want to really highlight what you said on there should be specific considerations for women. There's a strong division of labor across gender lines. You said trust is very important, and that's the cornerstone of their relationships with their customers, of their supply chain, but also flexibility and convenience. These are very important as women do so many other things as well. So thank you for highlighting that. And these should be like considerations that we should take into account in any policy direction. So with that, thank you again, Katerina, for that overview. And I will now open the floor to any questions or any comments or anything that you want to say. You can either write it in the question box below, or simply raise your hand and we can have a conversation. So let me just check. So while we wait for some of the questions to come in, maybe just some starters, Katerina, from your study. So what would you say are the emerging trends in terms of policy directions for both Vietnam and Indonesia? And where do you think we could integrate these considerations? Are there any opportunities right now to include these considerations on some policy directions that are happening in either country?
Yes, happy to answer that. But I also think there is, yeah, I can see a couple of hands raised. So I think
Okay.
very briefly, in terms of policy, some of the most encouraging ones that I've seen are actually coming from Vietnam. And then I see one is the fact of moving beyond these pilots of requesting segregations into the at least, three main types of waste and extending that overall. So I think that makes a significant difference, because I think realistically speaking, while we work on trying to minimize the amount of plastic that is purchased at the household level, I think we are all aware of the fact that that might be more of a long-term solutions, and there are very entrenched habits of relying on plastic for so many things, so I think one of the most effective solutions is really trying to really support households in doing segregation the best they can, right? Again, infrastructure and guidance, very practical. And the second thing is also this idea of the cooperatives, to strengthen the informal sector. Now, there's been different attempts or ideas about how to formalize the informal sector, but actually one of the things that came out also from our research is that informal collectors, they do not necessarily want to formalize, actually, for different reasons. And one of them, they actually really also appreciate the fact that it's the flexibility aspect, flexibility across, so many different factors. And so in the sense that they do prefer to stay informal, but there are obvious benefits of bringing them together, sort of joining forces and sharing access to information. Again, as I said, sometimes it's surprising that they just really don't know the price for some of the items, and how just by perhaps, separating certain items, cleaning them a little bit better, it can go for a completely different price or things like that. So those are strengthening the role, or thinking about having these cooperatives, networks at a different level, whichever makes sense depending on the municipality. I think that's actually a very promising solution.
Yeah, and very practical as well. Thank you, Katerina, for that. And yes, I see a couple of raised hands here. May I call first Jingmin Huang for your question? Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Katerina. Really amazing presentation. I'm Jing Ming, working for Water and Urban Development Sector Group, and my team covers Central West and East Asian countries. Your presentation is very, very comprehensive, and I really appreciate your way to use the digital tools to improve the situation of the women collectors on this solid waste. I have maybe one question plus one idea I want to share with you. The question is, since I'm doing urban development, I also have visited more than 50, 60 solid landfills, yeah, or dump sites. So women collectors is always very dominant thing in all these landfills or the dump sites. And not only that, in many landfills, I always notice women doing the collections also with their kids, with very young kids.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not very sure, because I saw your photos, no kids is in any of your photos. So I don't know what's the situation in the two cities in Indonesia and Vietnam. So I wonder, if you have seen this issue, because definitely I had chat with some of them, and then it turned out that they are almost the lowest level in the society. Due to all sorts of reasons, they couldn't have any way to make a living by themselves with little kids. No other family support, and finally it turned out they all come to this landfill to make this living, because of course to come to pick the solid waste doesn't need any no barrier. Yeah, you can just come and do it. So I don't know if you have any method to take care of those people, women with kids who are almost the lowest level in their society. And then the second is, of course, I fully agree your attitude and also your respect to women, that they want to keep the freedom. They don't want to change into a very formal picklers. They just want to continue. This I think all very good. I fully agree. So my observation or my idea is how we can really help them to increase their income of waste picklers. Because you have mentioned the trainings, how to manage their plastic. In fact, I noticed in many of the landfills or the dump site, now there are increasing amount of e-waste, including mobile phones and all that. And then women are pretty good at to destroy it and get the precious of the metal. So if we can have some very specific training to help those women picklers or women collectors to have their their skills to really do this kind of e-waste recycling, of course, with adequate protection, both their their air, their touch and other things. So because such e-waste would have much higher value than just normal, pickling from their landfill. So is that some idea for you that we can maybe explore some kind of a high value waste for women to pick, so they can also increase their income? Because I see in your presentation, their top target for their work is to increase their cash income. Yeah. So have you that's my thought. So one question and one thought. Thank you. Really appreciate the very good presentation. Very, very impressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Jingmin, for the observation and the question. Let me see. I mean, I agree 100% with everything you said. So actually, in terms of the fact of the women with kids, so this study actually, what we aimed to do was, or the focus, I should say, was really to try to see how digital solutions that are fundamentally app, run by the private sector, could strengthen the plastic value chain, make it more efficient, while at the same time also improve the well-being of the different users. But I think very clearly, or very soon enough, we realized that there is so much more that needs to come into play to be able for all users to be able to really leverage innovations and use it and really have these, sort of positive social and environmental effect. You can't just leave it to the private sector to be able to do that. So in terms of these women with kids, yes, we none of the ones that we interviewed actually specifically was there with kids. We did notice the fact that in the case of Cirebon, yes, there was certainly, I would say, the lower, as you mentioned, the lower, what's the right word? The lower fringes within society. Again, the stigma is immense. They are extremely vulnerable. Oftentimes ethnic minorities, they don't speak the language, they don't have IDs, sometimes they're homeless. There's just fundamentally very, very little that they can do, which is also the reasons why they're such small negotiating power. And so when it comes to that, I think there has to be, while as I said, in Vietnam, it was a little bit different because they were older. So oftentimes we found that they would leave their families, they're older, 60, so they kids are already grown. So sometimes they would just go to the larger cities. They want to supplement their income because they find it that it's easier to do that than, let's say, working in the fields. That's one of the things that we kept hearing that. So in terms of, but so that's why I mentioned that health insurance is extremely important. And whenever they mention that, it's not only for themselves, but it's also for the immediate family members. So if you look at engaging them, as I said, it's really a game changer. If you offer like health insurance, particularly covering the key family members, you will find no shortage of female pickers. If you don't offer that, it becomes much more difficult because then it's much less appealing for them. And I think the second question was
On training.
on training, yes. So the training, absolutely. So what we are suggesting, the recommendations, you see, fundamentally, there is so much within those recommendations because we realize that you can't just focus on one thing or the other thing. It really has to be quite holistic. There are gaps at so many different levels. And what we kept hearing again and again, and also the reason for the association in Indonesia, which is the first one in the country, is that even partner organizations, they were quite surprised about how little knowledge of market prices collectors would have. So you would imagine that because they work in the sector, they would know, okay, for this particular item, I would fetch such a price. But the truth is that because they're used to always having this sort of ceiling, which are the brokers, right? Their information is very limited. So just providing access to proper information in addition to all of that is considered to be almost like a game changer. So information coupled with the ability to, as you said, know how to handle, the different items. But it's really fueling knowledge together with the equipment, because you might have knowledge, but if you don't have the equipment, then you're not going to be able to leverage that.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you
Great
very
points,
much.
Katrina and Jingmin. Great. Let me go on to another question. We have another raised hand here. Hatrin. May I please call Hatrin?
Thank you very much. My name is Ha. I'm a recycling expert at Resonance Global. I'm supporting a waste recycling activity in ASEAN, and I've been involved in a regional and national program on plastic waste management over the past years. So I'm very interested in the topic of this workshop, and thank you very much for a very informative and insightful presentation. I have two questions for you. The first one, I found that you present the perspective from the informal waste collector as well as the women consumer at the household level. So do you have any plan to gather the perspective in terms of barrier and challenge for digital technology adoption from the perspective of the aggregator or junk shop, like really the middleman who is play the intermediate role in between the collector and the recycler. So do you have any insight on that, or do you have plan to collect the perspective? That is the first question. And second question is that I observed that from your presentation, it seemed that like both the women as the household level and the informal waste collector, they prioritize the increase of income or like extra income or extra earnings from the utilization of digital technologies. So from the different digital apps that you surveyed and interviewed, whether or not you have seen any solid outcomes in terms of addressing the needs from the women in the household and the informal collector. Is there any evidence in terms of long-term benefit, in terms of income that digital technology adoption can bring to these women? So those are the two questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ha. Yep.
Thank you, Ha, for
Katrina.
the questions. Yes, thank you, Rocky. So I would say for the first ones, so the questions on junk shops and intermediaries, actually, we did also conduct primary research on the intermediaries. I didn't focus on this one particularly because I just wanted to really strengthen the role of women. When it comes to junk shop and intermediaries, both in Vietnam and Indonesia, we found that there are more either men-owned or family-owned, so it's just the role of women was different. But what we found in terms of the digital solutions, what they really appreciate is the data. Apologies, I realize there's a lot of background noise on my side. What we realize is that they appreciate the data monitoring and tracking. So some of these apps, and I didn't mention them specifically, but there is a particularly, actually both in Indonesia and in Vietnam, we found that there are some apps that are really trying to provide data. So it's almost some resource management system that they're particularly useful to intermediaries. In the case of VECA, for example, they also provide invoices, so that can be particularly useful for the ones that are at a certain level. So that is something that we found for them, really the data aspects, because, and also the bookkeeping, actually, I should say. Some of these apps, they offer bookkeeping services, so that makes it easier for them. In the case of the second question that you asked about increasing income, I would say that it is very clear that there is an increase of income on the collector side, because instead of having to wander around and looking for waste, they can easily see where there is a collection request, and they can decide based on the volume of the type whether it is attractive enough for them to go and pick it up, correct? So that immediately saves them time. In terms of the, and so that's for the collectors, I would say that's quite clear. In terms of the users or the household users, so the waste generators, what we found is that, yes, there are some that really leverage the opportunity of fundamentally converting recyclables in money. But we actually also see the case where a lot of these app users are, again, middle to upper middle income. They're more motivated by the desire, on one hand, to support recycling, and two, actually very often to actually really support the informal collectors. So we've heard examples where collectors would be tipped more of what they actually pay for the recyclables. So it's, I would say at this point, the individuals that are using this type of waste apps are still, I would say, a minority within the population of the two countries that are particularly aware of the environmental benefits. It hasn't really translated into mass use at this point.
Great. Thanks, Katarina.
One rapid follow-up. Do you have any, exact number, for example, like how many percentage of income has increased for the collector compared to not utilizing the digital app?
Actually, that one, I would have to go back. I don't, no, I don't have any immediate one at this point. No.
Thank you very much.
Right.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Katerina. Yep, and thank you, Ha, for that question. I just have one quick last question here in the chat box, and this is from Ken Chan from ADB. And please feel free, Ken, to jump in if you want. But his question is about how to engage buyers of the waste collected. So, what's your perspective on how these digital tools can support their operation, the buyers' operations, and how to improve the income of these collectors, the dependency of the buyers, of the collectors' dependency on the buyer's skin? Want to add more to that? Please go ahead.
Sure. Hi, Rocky. Good to see you again. And hi, Katerina. It's a very good presentation. I think some of that was already picked up by the previous question, the participant, Ha. But I would kind of want to stress actually the importance of being very clear on, who's buying it and whether they have the capacity to absorb. Because, if the goal is to really increase the income for the women collectors, they really do depend not only through the app, but also ultimately the buyers of those. And I think one question I guess I had, in addition to what your discussion was with Ha earlier, was did your study actually map out beyond, say, those junk shops and aggregators? Because it's waste management is like an entire value chain. I mean, it's also important to map it all out up to the kind of bigger companies who actually then buy from the aggregators, because driving the demand for the waste is really quite important to make this sustainable. So I wondered, in terms of your study, whether you looked into any of that. If not, I think that might be an area for further consideration as well to make this thing sustainable. That's all from me. Thank you.
Yes, thank
Okay.
you for the question. So the project itself definitely looked at the entire value chain. We work with Sureka, was the consulting arm of Veolia and DT Global. So we definitely looked at that. I specifically focused here on really the role of women. So I focus really on the role of households and collectors rather than touching on the others. But I would say that one of the things that it was just obvious and came up very clear when it comes to digital solutions is that none of the digital solutions can exist if you don't have clear buyers, So in the case of, for example, collectors, the buyers are the intermediaries, but in the case of the intermediaries, the buyers would be the recyclers and yes, fundamentally the recyclers and factories. So that was clear. I don't know if did you want to have any specific questions on the role of women as buyers, or?
No, I think that was well explained. I was just thinking, what can be done, I guess, to really improve the demand for the waste collected by the women, because that's how to make it sustainable. So I just wondered, in your discussions, for example, with Veolia, who I'm quite familiar with back in Europe, where I did a lot of waste management projects, did they kind of suggest what, from their perspective, what's important, what things could be enhanced or improved or overcome, especially through the digital tools that you referred to, from their perspective as the ultimate buyer of this. But I do need to jump to my next call. I'm already a minute late. So, but thank you, everyone. I just wanted to leave that question there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Katerina, did you want to say anything? But
no, and also related, of course, Ken is not here anymore, but it also related to that question. I think the other colleagues would do much better justice. So I'll leave that question.
Great. Thank you so much, Katerina. I unfortunately, we don't have enough time for this important topic. I mean, to discuss more, but we do have an opportunity to have more discussions on this, because this will lead up to the Circular Economy Forum that will be happening in the next week from April 17 to 18 at the ADB headquarters. So for those of you who have not signed up, please feel free to register in the Circular Economy Forum. That will be on the 7th to the 18th of June. So we'll have this conversation. So again, I would like to thank Katerina for this insightful overview of digitizing waste with women at the center, and for providing us with potential opportunities to address the specific challenges faced by women in this sector. At this juncture, I'd like to remind everyone that we will share the presentations and video session in our data sharing platform page. So please make sure to check that out. That's the ADB Data Room Circular Economy ADB Knowledge Event Repository. And again, please don't forget to fill up the evaluation form that will be shared to you after this webinar, as your feedback is important for us to improve this series. Thank you, everyone, for joining again. I hope this webinar has offered invaluable insights on how we can navigate scale up initiatives towards a gender-sensitive and gender-responsive circular economy. Again, this has been Rocky Guzman from the ADB. Thank you for tuning in this afternoon, and hope to see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.
Thank you again. Thanks, everyone. Bye.